Hi there, welcome to the Raven's Call. I'm Eric Wordweaver Sjerven, Goalie of the Ridgar folk here in East Texas, and I'd like to welcome you to my channel. If you guys are new to the channel, this is a show where I ramble on about different heathen-related subjects, just whatever kind of crosses my mind at the time, lights my mind on fire. And big UPG warning and all this stuff, guys. This is how I see the world, and this is my insights. I do get into some of the historical elements and things like that. From time to time, I'm a very middle-of-the-road heathen who likes to, pull from tradition as well as growing towards the future. So you get a little bit of that, but there are some excellent channels already out there about just straight-up historical stuff. So this is kind of just my take on the world to show people how one guy in one area of the world does heathenry. It's up to y'all whether or not you like it or not. So, before we get started, let's take care of some housekeeping stuff. If you guys like the channel, if you like my videos, if you like what's coming out, hit the like button down below. Hit subscribe. At the time of this filming, I'm at like 927 subscribers. That is ridiculous. I never thought I'd have that many subscribers. It's kind of awesome. So thank you guys for jumping in here and letting me know what it is you like and giving me some feedback on these videos. I know some of my videos are better than others. I do have my off days, and there are just some subjects that I try to handle for newbies that just don't necessarily lend themselves well to a video. Plus, you guys know me, hashtag wordy bastard. I like to ramble. So, if you continue to like my videos, hit like down below, subscribe, ding the bell. All of this helps to keep the videos getting out there in front of other people. It also helps to keep you up to date on what I'm doing, and also will help propagate other videos like mine in your newsfeed. More you interact with heathen videos, more heathen videos you see. The rest of my contact information is down below. You guys can hit me up on my email, Saraha, my Facebook group, Wordweaver Productions. A lot of conversation goes on there. I've got a recommendations feed on there where I have people come on and give me video recommendations, and then from those I build out different videos. So without any further ado, we're going to jump into today's subject. Now, I promised this a little while ago that I was going to start doing some kind of book reviews and some recommendations, reading list kind of stuff. And so I wanted to touch today on a book that I really, really like. And this is one that is actually on loan to me at the moment. I have to give this thing back, and I don't want to. So I'm going to go out and buy my own copy. But this is The Tradition of Household Spirits by Claude Lecateau, Ancestral Lore Practices and Practices. So I don't know if you guys can see this well enough. I know sometimes it flips the video. I'm going to try and put the ISBN number up there if it will focus in on it. I don't know if it will or not. I may have to go through and edit later. But anyway, the deal here is that this book is an absolute fantastic book. I actually have to look because I think my camera may have flipped the image to begin with anyway. So we'll see from there. This is an absolutely fantastic little book. Now, Claude Lecateau, this guy does a very interesting approach to heathenry in that he pulls a lot from kind of the archaeological side of things, literary side of things. So there's an academic element to what he does. But similarly, he goes into some of the woo-woo stuff too, which is something that really I enjoy. So within this book, he tries to talk about a lot of things such as Husvaettir and landwights, things like that. Now, Husvaettir, of course, means house white or house spirit, which some will call the hofgod, or the house god. And this is a wonderful little book so far. And I dig it. I dig it. I dig it. It goes in and it talks about some of the house and its construction, some of the practices and traditions around why, some of the general layout of the building and what the different spiritual elements to the buildings are, house interior, and then goes into the antiquity of domestic spirits in the Middle Ages, all the way up through manifestation of household spirits, purveyor spirits, haunted houses, and on into some summary aspects. It even has an entire appendix on elves. So this is a neat book. This one actually got my wheels turning about some other stuff, which is why we're doing today's video. But I wanted to give a shout out to this book before I got started, because anybody who's looking at building a relationship with their Husvaettir or with their land in general needs to read this book. I consider this to be a must read. Not necessarily because the information in it is completely invaluable or that there's information in here that you can't get anywhere else. It's not necessarily that at all. Because a lot of this I already knew, a lot of this I've already looked at, but the one thing is, it's cataloged in such a way, and he goes back and forth between the academic and the woo-woo in such a way that it's really thought-provoking. It gets you to think outside the box and look at the house spirits and just the land in general in some different ways, and I really, really enjoy that. I do. I think that there is definitely some benefit to how this works, what it does, and yeah, I recommend it. Definitely a good read, and I think you guys should check it out. So, there's other books that I consider must-reads, and I will come to those here before long. I'm thinking about trying to sit down and do a just a general reading list kind of video, but that's kind of difficult to do, so I may just do some top 10 kind of stuff. I don't know. We'll figure it out. Books are a little bit more difficult because I shoot at my office and my library is at the house, and my library is quite extensive. So that doesn't even count my digital stuff, which is very difficult for me to hold up and show on the camera. So we will see. Anyway, based on all of this and this recommendation, I wanted to talk a little bit today about the Husvaettir. Okay? I've talked about Husvaettir before. I've talked about idol worship. I've talked about Husvaettir. I've talked about a lot of things on the channel. And this is something that's near and dear to my heart. Okay? The Husvaettir, specifically, is the spirit of the house. And it is the embodiment of the soul of the house. It is a spirit that takes up residence within the house, but is in and of itself the spirit of the house, the soul of the house. You've ever seen those houses on the side of the road where no one's lived for a long time and it's gone derelict and begins to just, the house itself looks dead. Well, the reason for that is the house itself is dead. And, sorry, I'm adjusting the lighting on my camera. The house itself suffers from the absence of a spirit. And the spirit has abandoned the house because the spirit has fed it everything that it can, and it just can't anymore. It's either moved on to find another domicile where people actually live, or has spent all of its energy and dissipated, or however that process specifically works. But the generalities are that the spirit of the house, the Husvaettir, is the life of the house. The more you feed and care for your Husvaettir, your house god, your house spirit, the stronger your relationship with your home is, and the stronger your relationship with your land is. Now, in general, the way I see things, because keep in mind, this channel is just kind of how I see things. There's other people that are going to see things a little bit differently, but the way I see things is that the Husvaettir is tied to the land. And it's kind of a land spirit that comes in and becomes the house spirit, because it doesn't just protect the house, but the land and property that you're on as well. It's a dominant spirit for the residential area that you live in, that your home, your domicile. Now, within the home, I build an altar that is dedicated specifically to my Husvaettir. This is a space that is their space within my space. Now, in my idol worship video, I went into a lot of this, so I don't want to necessarily be redundant on this, but I am going to touch on the fact that the Husvaettir altar is an agreed upon place where I can go and contact my Husvaettir easily. It's an agreed upon meeting place. It's like two neighbors that go to the same spot in the fence in order to talk to one another. They know that if they're over there by that point of the fence, that they can come over and visit, kind of thing, and talk across the fence. Well, spiritual, physical plane kind of element, that's somewhat what the altar serves with regards to the house god. You are giving them a place to embody, a place to inhabit, specifically for the purpose of interacting with each other. And of course, it's a little bit more complicated than that. It's not necessarily as simplistic as I make it sound, but the gist is, the idol, the altar, everything is the conduit, the go-between between you and the Husvaettir, which does not always take a physical form. So this is the thing. The Husvaettir has its own personality. Okay, it is. If you've ever seen like David the Gnome, an old cartoon back in the day. If you haven't watched this cartoon, go and watch this cartoon. I know it's a cartoon. It's a kid's show. It used to air on Nickelodeon back in the day. It's also been shown on some other things. I believe it's on Amazon Prime at the moment. I know that you can find some of it on YouTube and just around. But look it up. Look up David the Gnome. And what you will find is that it's all based off of the Gnome book. And I can't really remember who wrote the Gnome book at the moment. But it's one of the works that is heavily influential in how we see gnomes. In that short, stocky, white beard, red cap, blue shirt, tan trousers kind of look. Very influential in that. It's a very cool book. I have one of them. It's a series of books, actually, and I have one of them at the house. Mostly art books with some flesh out. But the series was great. And if you look at them, you kind of get an idea from this show how Husvaettir might work, how spirits of the land might work, and how they work together to heal one another, to support one another. And that's what the Husvaettir is. The Husvaettir, is similar to an alpha spirit for that place. It's the spirit that takes up residence within the home, is the go-between between you and the land outside, and because you feed it, it grows stronger and therefore does take up an alpha position over your land. Plus, when you come in and you do a land taking for your land, you are effectively striking a deal with the property, and you are setting up space for the interaction. You are setting up kind of rules of operation. You're building a relationship. When you step out and do a land taking, you are literally saying, everything in this land needs to know that this is mine. If you don't like it, get out. So the first thing you do in a land taking is you step up and you declare that this is yours and that you have taken dominion over this. You have taken responsibility for this, and it's a reciprocal responsibility. Not only are you declaring ownership of the land, but you are declaring stewardship of the land as well. So yes, it's yours, and you are expecting certain responsibilities from the land to you as far as sustaining you and providing what you need. But then you are also pledging your responsibility for the land because you have taken ownership for it. This is cutting a deal with the land spirits of your land and then inviting one of those into the house to become the Husvaettir, the house spirit. That's where the bread and butter is, because you're bringing the land and the house together, because the house becomes part of the land, and you seek their blessing. Now, the Husvaettir is a luck giver. Most of the time in ritual, what we like to focus on is relationship with luck givers. Okay, that's the gods and goddesses who give us luck, our ancestors who give us luck. The Vaettir can give us luck depending on our relationship with the Vaettir, and this is one of those instances. The Husvaettir is probably the strongest Vaettir relationship you will have, the strongest spirit relationship, because it's the most granular and daily interaction is with the Husvaettir, because that is where you interact the most. That's where you live. That's your life. So I recommend, personally, from my own experience, my own practices, daily interactions with your Husvaettir. I recommend getting out and talking to your Husvaettir on the regular. I recommend giving daily offerings, something small, just a nod, something you know they like, and including them in your daily process. Again, I know I talked about a bunch of this in the idol worship video, but still, I like to put out coffee. Some people put out porridge, oatmeal, honey, milk, spirits, like wine, beer, ale, liquor, whatever. It depends on what you're doing and why you're doing it. The big thing is to include them. I like to locate my Husvaettir altar in a central space in the house so that they're included in the conversation, included in the liveliness. And then I like to feed them things that they like. And that takes time, getting to know them, seeing what they respond to. And I say they because here's the thing. I don't think that it's necessarily just one spirit that takes up residence. I think you can have multiple spirits that operate in unison. Like, I'm fairly certain for my home, we have a dual Husvaettir. We have what effectively, in our terms, would equate to a husband-wife team. Male and female element. So this dual Husvaettir, dual spirit, I think it's two spirits that work alongside each other and have a relationship that we would recognize as husband and wife. I don't know necessarily how they recognize it, because they don't necessarily see things the way we see things. But anyway, it's a tandem team, and I think of them as the Lord and the Lady of the house. You know, the Husvaettir, the protectors, the couple that watches over the house and protects us and takes care of our babies, our animals, and helps us to keep the house running. Now, the function of the Husvaettir in the house, if the Husvaettir is happy, the house continues to be happy. The house thrives from that spiritual energy. This is a good, strong thing. You want this. So, you can keep these relationships up. And if you keep a Husvaettir happy, then the plumbing works, the lights work, things don't break down nearly as fast. Part of that is because the Husvaettir is feeding energy back into the house, and it is keeping these things alive. The house itself is a physical manifestation of your relationship with the Husvaettir. Part of it is because the things that you do to keep a Husvaettir happy make a house clean and well upkept. Because it's not just giving offerings. It's not just adding trinkets to the altar to show you're thinking about them. It's not just those little sentiments. Those help to sweeten the pot. But your real meat and potatoes on building a relationship with your Husvaettir is the care and feeding of the house itself. The more you keep it up, clean, repair, things like that, the happier the Husvaettir is. Because if you don't care enough to upkeep the house, then why should it think you care enough about it, he, she, it, to build a relationship with? Why should it care about you if you don't care about its physical manifestation? So this is why it's important to do your upkeep, to do maintenance on the house, to clean the house on the regular. And this is something that I know I am guilty of, is not necessarily getting chores done in a timely manner. Twyla's always on my hide, trying to get me to stay up on things, and it's just because there's a stupid amount of things to do when you have both a job and land and house. You guys know. But it's important. So I appreciate that she stays on me, and I try to stay up with my stuff. Do I always? No. There's a whole bunch of stuff that I still need to do. And I hope that when I do get around to it, it will make my Husvaettir happy. But some of them are fairly major projects. So just keep trucking, keep doing. So that's what you need to do. You got to keep going. You got to keep working at it. You got to make the house something of a priority. And I know in today's age that can be very, very difficult. In the olden days, it was more common because we didn't have all of the distractions. We didn't have YouTube or video games or books or anything like that. Those entertainment elements that suck us away and eat up some of our time, but are things that we need to calm our minds and quiet our minds because of the hustle and bustle and rush that exists today that did not exist back then. It's a completely different world from where our ancestors were, and so we have to look at things a little bit differently. In the olden days, where the pace was slower and everybody sat around the hearth and the fireplace at night, told a few stories, and pretty much went to bed shortly after the sun went down because they had to get up bright and early in the morning to be able to take care of animals and land, the pace was slower. It was easier to interact with the Husvaettir. It was easier to feel that connection because you're not running and gunning, you're not blowing and going and doing constantly. Unlike what we do now, where, I don't know about you guys, but there's some days that I get home so late at night that I have just a little bit of time to eat, take care of the animals, maybe sit down for a few minutes to enjoy an episode of something before I've got to go to bed and get up, do it all again the next morning. So I have to find and make time in there to tend to my Husvaettir, which is why every morning when I get up, I exercise a specific taboo. And that is, I will not break my fast until I have given offering to the ancestors and the Husvaettir. I don't get my coffee until they get their coffee. I don't eat food until they get their offering, which almost always is coffee, because I share a cup of coffee with them in the morning. It's a nod. I have dedicated cups that are specifically for them, for those purposes. And so this is a ritual that we have built up. It's a little bit of my hearth culture. a little something from inside my domicile that you can see. You can put out foodstuffs, you can put out drink and libation, and you don't have to do necessarily daily like I do. I prefer daily because it helps to maintain that relationship. You can do weekly if it's a grand show. I do frequently, especially if I'm going to be drinking or doing something highly sociable, like to put out something for them. I always like to put something out for the Husvaettir whenever we have festival, whenever we have people over. Those kind of things are important because it's very much a spirit. It's very much a living, breathing thing. And this relationship that you build takes work. It takes time. There's other manifestations other than just the care and keeping of the house. You will actually see sometimes out of the corner of your eye a little flash, a little shadow. The stories of Tomte or Nissa, these little house elves, little gnomes, things like that, that occupy the house, are manifestations of Husvaettir when they try to take somewhat of a physical form, because they're one of those spirits that passes between the physical and the spiritual, kind of at will. They have a manifestation both in the physical and the spiritual plane, and are never wholly in one or the other. They're fence walkers after fashion, mid-level Vaetir like we talked about before. So you'll see this. They'll see them, the Husvaettir dashing about the house every once in a while, especially if you have animals. Animals are very, very in tune with the Husvaettir. And they're very tied to one another. The Husvaettir spends a lot of time with the animals while you're away at work. You know, they build a relationship with them. Plus, animals, being Vaetir themselves, can see the Husvaettir more easily than we can. And therefore, it's not unusual, like Twyla and I were talking this the other day, our cats would go absolutely nuts and go running around the house and just tearing off. And not necessarily playing with each other, but playing with something we can't see. And so I'm 99% convinced that they're playing with the Husvaettir, and that the Husvaettir is either being chased or is chasing them about the house. And I love it. I laugh. It's beautiful. I just enjoy seeing that so much. Because that kind of thing is good. You know, that's the feeling of strength that comes from happy, healthy Husvaettir. Okay. Similarly, a lot of people will mistake hauntings as they'll mistake the Husvaettir for hauntings. And that's the thing, is that not everybody's house is haunted. Not everybody's house has a ghost hanging around it. Do I believe in ghosts? Yes. Is it exactly like everybody else thinks? Probably not, but that's okay. That's for another story. But a lot of times when people see a figure in their house that likes to do specific things, ritualized things, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a ghost per se. It doesn't necessarily mean that it was ever tied to a person in the first place. It could be tied to the Husvaettir. It could be the manifestation of the Husvaettir coming out and being seen by you and interacting with you in some way, shape, form, or fashion. Because you have to remember, Vaetir are other. They're not human. They don't necessarily seem and act the way that we do. They have their own rules, their own social structures, and their own interaction styles. So while we can find some common ground, it's folly to assume that everything the Husvaettir sees and does is exactly the same way as humans. We have to assume that there is some difference, because there's difference between how we and dogs do things, or we and cats do things and see things. It stands to reason that another spirit, another form, would have different processes for processing the world around it, interacting with the world around it, all of that. So we have to kind of meet them where they're at and find a common ground, a common communication style. So that's something that takes time, develops, and you work on it over time. So it's a good thing. It takes time, but is totally worth it. So yeah, we've talked a little bit about what the Husvaettir is, what the Husvaettir does, and kind of how to interact with it. I highly recommend just reaching out and trying. You don't have to get it right the first time. It's something that takes time and it takes effort. And it's worth building the relationship even if it takes forever to do. I highly, highly recommend it. So definitely develop something of an altar, which is a dedicated go-between space. Put out your routine offerings. Look for signs of the Husvaettir around you. Help to keep with the upkeep of the house. and you will have a strong relationship with your Husvaettir. Your Husvaettir will bless you with luck. That luck manifests itself through the wellness of the house and the land, plus just your general well-being. When you enter into a place and a place feels negative, foreboding, this means that the Vaetir of that place is not happy. Sometimes it's outright malevolent, depending on the situation, which is why a lot of people, like I said before, will mistake hauntings as for what is actually the housewight at play, because they are complex creatures too. It's not a simple thing. So sometimes when bad things happen in a location, the Husvaettir takes on a piece of that energy, and that can affect the spirit of a place. There are places where Landvaetir in general, it's undeniable that they will never be the same. You start looking at places like the internment camps over in previous Nazi or occupied Europe, some of your Auschwitz and things like that. The Vaetir for there are forever changed by what happened there. Similarly, Hiroshima and things like that. The Vaetir there are forever changed by the events that occurred there. Those energies have a significant impact on them. Some of them are outright chased away. Some of them are just altered by the energies that are created in that environment as they adapt to it and are impacted by it. The same thing goes for if you've ever been to places where bad things have happened, like houses that had years of abuse and murder happen within them. That Husvaettir is going to take on some of that. Not necessarily that it's going to take on murderous intent, but you can't be around that for that long without it affecting your mood, without it, souring your outlook to a certain extent. And it's going to take more work to appease and make that housewight, that Husvaettir, more amenable to you. So, and this is something that segues into kind of, I know this is going to run a little bit long, but the Husvaettir, there's tons of stuff on it. I'll probably come back to some Husvaettir stuff later. But one of the important things that people need to know is that when you enter into a house, you're not necessarily automatically going to have a connection with the Husvaettir. Like I said, it takes time to build it. Similarly, if you have a house built, you need to invite a Husvaettir in. It's not just going to magically appear because the house was suddenly built. You need to breathe life into the house by inviting that spirit in. But you also have to set up wards to keep negative spirits out. This helps to protect the Husvaettir, to help the Husvaettir become stronger, and to put up lines of defense to assist it in defending the house. So I recommend about once a year going out and renewing the wards on the house. This is something we've actually looked at trying to work into our Livka celebrations, our spring festival celebrations. And so this is kind of a neat thing that we try to do, just kind of a recharging of those energies. And I've got some new stuff I want to play with this year on trying to do that. So hopefully I'll have some stuff to talk about on the channel as we play with these ideas. So when you come to a new house, when you move into a new place, you've got to get to know the spirit that's there. Find out if a spirit is there or if it has abandoned it. If there's a spirit that's there, then you need to get to know it, and it's going to have some history. It's going to have some baggage. If it is just outright malevolent and does not like you and there's nothing you can do, you may have to pull a rank and chase the spirit out and invite in a new spirit. It doesn't happen very often. I don't like having to go there because it's kind of a bit rough and tumble, but the natural world is a bit rough and tumble, and sometimes you have to drive out a resident in order to take up residence. It's an unfortunate part of the process, but it is part of the process nonetheless. So can't just cherry pick the good and the bad. It's all one big process. But most of the time what you can do is build a relationship with the Husvaettir and begin to heal a relationship between the two of you, helping to kind of smooth over the rough edges from previous experiences, just like you would with somebody who's come from a traumatic background. Sometimes they're so desperate for attention that they'll just suck you right in and try and make you feel at home even when the house isn't necessarily right for you. You walk into a house and it's just super inviting because it's been on the market forever, and the spirit's like, come inside and be mine. And you're like, that's great, but this isn't the right fit for me. Don't necessarily give in to that pull from the Husvaettir, because if it's not the right fit, then you won't end up being happy in the house, and it will affect your relationship with the Husvaettir, and everything will go south. So not worth it. It needs to be the right fit, and you need to get along with the Husvaettir. And it's different for like mobile homes, because mobile homes aren't set up as a home yet, so I don't frequently see the spirit travel with the mobile home. The mobile home's kind of a shell. It's kind of like hermit crabs, you know? You move a new shell in, and then the spirit comes into that shell and sets up. When it's a permanent home, that's a permanent structure on like pier and beam or slab, something like that, that's a different story, because that's not going anywhere. That's more like the cave that the spirit's moved into, as opposed to the shell that it can be like, okay, I want to do one of these, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's a slightly different take when the house itself is transient, and it can become more permanent as if it's like set and stays and becomes part of the land. It's different when something is actually built there and is becoming a part of the land as it is built. If it's just moved in and set up, then it takes longer for it to be integrated as part of the land, part of the property. It does happen, but it takes time, especially if you don't move the thing. So you will see traditions of people putting things like horseshoes over the door, iron things on the walls. This is to help kind of keep out baleful spirits. A lot of times what they'll do is they'll invite the housewite in, and then they'll put these things up to kind of create a barrier between the inside and the outside world. The Husvaettir is something that you are inviting into your inner yard, because the house is the physical manifestation of the inner yard. And so you're inviting them into the inner circle, and then you're establishing a boundary to keep the outer circle out. I'm going to do a video, I think, on wards here before long, if I can wrap my head around how to do the narrative for that. But because they're very important and they play into a lot of different things, boundaries are important, because boundaries create thresholds, they create in-between places, transitions. Boundaries are extremely important, especially from a spiritual standpoint and from a theological standpoint. And herein we, with the house, have a boundary between us and the outside world, and we work with the Husvaettir to protect that and to strengthen that. So you'll see things like salt on windows, the iron on the walls, specific paintings or designs that are intended to help strengthen the protection of the house. The Pennsylvania Dutch do a wonderful little hex design tradition where they'll paint specific pictures on these circular boards and then put them up on either barns or buildings or anything like that. And effectively, they're sigils of blessing with specific artwork meaning specific things. It's really cool if you ever look into it. I dig it. Definitely worth a look. I've done rune carvings on posts that support the house. I've done runic like placards and things like that, that when we look at it, we imbue it with our psychic energy of recognition, to charge it with our energies and its intended purpose, such as protection or blessing of luck for those within, these kind of things. There's tons of little tricks that you can do to help, one, strengthen the relationship with the Husvaettir, two, protect the Husvaettir from the outside world. Even as it is protecting you, you are also protecting it. You're both watching the fort, because you both are the fort. So these are things that you can do. And it's a process, like I said. So I'm rambling on. I'm going to let things kind of go from here, because we are going to come back and we're going to talk about the Husvaettir more in later videos. I know some of this might be redundant from when I did my idol worship video, but I wanted something dedicated to the Husvaettir so that when people search it out, they can see Husvaettir video or Housewhite video, because it is extremely important. I talked before in one of my previous videos here about individual cultic practice. Hearth culture is extremely important. Hearth culture is the meat and potatoes of heathenry. How we interact in tribes, how we interact in intertribal relations and politics and all that, that's great. That's fine and dandy, but heathenry starts at home. And that's where it's at. That's the meat and potatoes and the bread and butter, is your home practices, what you do at home, how you develop your heathenry. When we come together as a tribe, we create a common culture. But that common culture is built up of these individual hearth cultures. If you don't have a developed hearth culture, then what are you bringing to the tribal culture? You know, that kind of thing. And interaction with the housewhite is essential to hearth culture, because that's where it's at home. It is in the hearth. A lot of times Husvaettir will set their altar is the hearth itself. And so we've gotten away from that in modern times with central heating and air, but some still have that, which is why I establish an artificial hearth in the form of an altar, where I can then go and interact with and build my life around this Husvaettir. But take the time, figure your Husvaettir out, learn more about it, and get this interaction going, because it's going to be worth it, I promise you. Totally worth it in the long run. This is, like I said, where it's at. It's part of, I mean, there's a reason some call it the house god. It's like the domestic deity, the god of the house, literally. And even though it's not necessarily of the level of our gods of Odin and Thor and Frigg and all of those, it's not an Aesir per se, but it is still a semi-divine protector of the house itself, after fashion. So, I mean, it is still a spirit of the profane world that is protecting our house, which is in the profane world. It's like a god with a small g instead of a big G, I guess you could say. So either way, check it out. Build those relationships. Remember, The Tradition of Household Spirits, Ancestral Lore and Practices by Claude Lecoteau. I am fairly certain this is going to flip the video backwards, so I may need to overlay the ISBN number. I may write it down there in the bottom if that doesn't come out, because it doesn't look like it's focusing right, because my camera is being silly. So, check it out. Great book. Will get you thinking outside the box. It's more valuable for you for how much it makes you think necessarily than how much is in it, but he does get you thinking, and I like that. I like that a lot. So, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it wasn't too redundant with some of the stuff that I've done before, but I felt like the housewhite, the Husvaettir, needed some dedicated time, because too often it can get kind of swept up in general Husvaettir conversations, general hearth culture conversations, and attention needs to be pulled to just how important our relationship with our Husvaettir really is. So this is my attempt to do so. Hope you guys found it entertaining, and I will see you guys next week with another installment of The Raven's Call. Hail, thank you. May your ancestors smile on you. Pre-show preening. Such fun. Pause for a second. You get a drink. Edit this. Whataburger, because we're in Texas, yo. Alright. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to... that was... What? Ladies and gentlemen? When do I ever do that? That's ridiculous. Let's try this again. In 3, 2, 1, let's jam. This is set up, crazy stuff, jacking with the camera. Okay, getting it set up. Line frame. There's human frame. Okay, cool. I hope this is gonna work out. Camera's in a, the microphone's in a wonky place. Oh. Alright, cool. Test footage. See what this does.